Welcome to Justice Uncensored. I'm your host, Cassandra Watkins, and I have the privilege of interviewing Tommy Vext today. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
We had a little snafu in the time scheduling, but we figured it out and we're here.
We did. We got it worked out. Yeah, it was really cool. I met Tommy at Mar-a-Lago, interestingly enough. That was my first Mar-a-Lago trip. Have you been there before?
That was my first trip too, yeah.
Oh, neat. Okay, yeah. And I whenever we met, I met the other guy.
I think you were with Jimmy Levy and I was with David Harris Jr. Yeah, we were like, oh, yeah.
That's cool. Yeah.
We had been friends online for years and hadn't gotten to meet in person. So that was like a meeting in person for the first time after years of talking and being friends and stuff. So it's pretty cool.
Well, what was neat about that is I was working with another media outlet, and in Vegas, I interviewed David Harris Jr. So we already knew each other, and I ran into Jimmy Levy and hit the guy that he does music with at CPAC just like a few weeks before that. And so it's kind of like, hey, and then there you were. And so it's just kind of one of those things. And I think it's cool how people, I don't know, I feel like we're an interesting tribe of people that I feel it's a calling that God is calling just a peculiar people, and we just keep meeting, and it's cool to see what it grows into.
Well, I mean, I think that the interesting thing about, it's being on the ground level and having, we'll get into a little bit of some of the things that I went through coming out as a patriot, and and obviously, I was canceled for supporting Trump in 2020, and I went from being a multi-platinum selling rock star with 6 #1 hits to being kicked off my label and my band and all this, just all the drama and lawsuits and all that crap. So but it's like, it's interesting to me because since I came out in 2020, all the people I've met are so diverse, and so like I lived in, I just moved to Tennessee from LA after being in California for 16 years, originally from New York City. And some of the, I kind of like started to come around, and I peeked my head out at a Huntington Beach rally, and Tito Ortiz invited me out, and then there's like Dream Rare, AJ Anomaly, who he was out, and there's just like all the Latinos for Trump, and then there were a large group of immigrants, of Chinese Americans, first generation, who also were supporting him. And there was, there's like a whole section of like blacks for Trump, and there were like bikers for Trump. And, I even met trans people who were trans for Trump, and the gays for Trump. And it's so interesting how, I've met so many more people that are like so diverse in their beliefs, or whatever they are, and we all seem to get along because we all care about this country. And the media has tried to paste like the patriot movement as a white supremacy movement, and it boggles my mind, and so I would have a lot of people in the beginning be like, oh, this is that and that is this. I'm like, yo, just come meet me. And everyone's singing and dancing and laughing and playing songs and taking pictures and going live and hugging, and the police are having a great time because everybody's and that's the thing. It's like Trump has boat parades and block parties, and Biden has riots. and it's so bizarre to me how the people who are still so easily had been convinced by the media that they're it was like everything is kind of hypocritical. Like for 4 years, the media was like, "Oh, Trump's going to start World War III," and now it seems like they're trying to start. The Democrats want to start World War III, and they're like, people are pro World War III. I'm just like, it's just bizarre to me.
I spend a lot of my time in Washington, D.C., and I was there in the midst of all of the Million MAGA marches, and I was there on January 6th, and a lot of people whisper that date. I actually, I wear it as a badge of honor because honestly, we were there peacefully protesting, and I actually got to pray for people and share the gospel with people. I do a lot of that. I do a lot of sharing of my testimony. And what's amazing about being in Washington, D.C. is, again, that's one of the most liberal places in the entire nation per capita. And it's like when
Mhm.
when you're there, everything is just like lifeless and black and white, no vibrance, no color, no expression. But it was like when the patriots would come to town, you would see people walking down the streets, and they didn't even have to have on red, white, and blue. You could tell who they were by the smiles on their faces and by the joy that's within them. And it is incredible. We do have fun, and the other side just seems so angry all the time, and it makes me sad for them. But so as far as you and your music, and I know a little bit of your back history, but I'm very curious to find out and to let our viewers know about where you have been as far as like what your background was even from childhood, and how you evolved in your more, I don't know if you'd call it conservative leanings or just, I mean, common sense leanings, but I would like for you to take us through that.
Well, I mean, I'm definitely, so for me, I was born in 1982. My twin brother and I, our mom was a drug addict, and we were abandoned at the hospital. And so, my brother and I got adopted. My parents that raised us had tried to have children. They could not. They had several attempts, and they had been fostering kids and, for a time, and just very good, like Christian folks. My dad was a Vietnam veteran, and my mom actually worked on Wall Street and then quit her job to take care of me and my brother and be a stay-at-home mom. And my dad worked for the school system. He was actually a janitor at the same junior high school I wound up attending years later. And it was pretty normal. We grew up in Brooklyn and South Brooklyn in New York City, and we had a normal kind of life. And then my parents adopted a little girl when I was 4 years old. So my sister and my brother and I were the only siblings that we've ever known. And then my dad struggled with alcoholism, and my brother struggled with severe mental health disorders. He was institutionalized. They thought he had schizophrenia. Then they diagnosed him with bipolar 2. And my brother, as a teenager, was increasingly violent, and my dad's drinking kind of took over, and my parents split up, and we were kind of left to fend for ourselves. And my mom took my sister. She kind of bailed because it wasn't a safe environment for my sister. And I went from being a straight A student to being on the street and selling drugs to get by. And the thing that probably kept me out of trouble the most was I was in a band, and so I always did music. So I had this band that was my grandmother's, the kid next door to my grandmother's, and he had a garage, and they had a bunch of instruments and stuff. And so I kind of threw myself into that as an escape, because I had all this anger and this fear and abandonment issues, and right, like I always struggled with the idea that nobody wanted me, to begin with. And then, during my formative years, my parents kind of sort of abandoned me, and abandoned my brother. And And that I have this crazy brother, and he turned to like a criminal lifestyle. And we just, it wasn't good. And I got kind of scared straight. I almost got killed by a gang when I was about 20 years old. I got my friend James and I got jumped. Uh, we I got run over by a car, and then the guys came with baseball bats to finish the job. And just so happened some people were driving by. It was late at night, and we were in front of the public library. And yeah, and so I kind of and as a good alcoholic and drug addict, right? Like I just always blamed something else. It wasn't because I was drinking and partying. It was because I lived in Brooklyn and I had to get out and I had to find something better to do with my life. And so the next couple of years, I really focused on music and I kind of got my act together. I started working construction and then I got an audition to do a band in LA and I moved. So I wound up moving to LA. And it was weird because this guitar player who was in a band that I grew up listening to, he kind of got kicked out of his band, and his life was kind of a mess. But I looked up to him, and so I wound up at like 24 years old moving to LA, to East LA. They were running a drug house, so it was literally I went from I thought that if I came to California, I was like sliding into home plate, like I'd be safe. And I literally just changed one hood to the other. So then I literally lived in Lincoln Heights. And I remember hearing, gunshots the first night, and I slept in a closet. There was like a bunch of squatters, like punk rock drug dealers living in this house and selling drugs at this house. And I got a job working I worked on the Sunset Strip. I got a job at the Roxy and the Key Club as a bouncer. And I would take the bus, home from work and then sleep in the closet, wake up, eat tuna fish, canned tuna. And then, there was a rusty workout set in the yard. And then I'd go to band rehearsal. And then from band rehearsal, I'd take the train into Hollywood and then go to work every night. And that was like my cycle. And so, I found it was just kind of nuts. And then, I got a record deal. And a lot of great things happened, right? Like I got to travel all over the world. I went to Europe for the first time. I went to Australia. We traveled all over the States and in a van and we played these shows. We got opening slots for all these metal bands and it was great. And, but like my drinking was bad and me and the guitar player kept butting heads because, we both came from like this kind of macho tough guy lifestyle where he was like a Mexican tough guy and I was like a New York City tough guy. And eventually we got to a fist fight and I beat his ass and I got kicked out of that band on stage, might I add. And then I joined another band. I auditioned for this punk band called Snot. And so this was another band. I actually grew up listening to this band. And the singer, Lynn Strait, they were from Santa Barbara. He died in 1998. And I had gotten to see them live a couple times. And I met them because when I was a kid, my manager was a weed dealer and he sold weed to these band guys. So that's how I discovered the band in like 1997. And then, they were doing their 10-year reunion in 2007. So I auditioned, I got the gig, but I just kind of didn't, I literally, I remember leaving New York and after, in my early 20s when I almost got killed, I remember thinking if I could just be like the guys on the posters on my wall, then that would fix me and I would be okay. And I was still not okay, and I got into a relationship with another addict and she got pregnant and I tried to get sober and then she relapsed and she lost a pregnancy. And, I think in retrospect, I used that as a reason to just do as much drugs and drink as possible, and now that became my excuse. Like, I'm going through something you don't understand. And I overdosed and I survived obviously. And I kind of hit rock bottom. And I remember just, saying, I remember waking up on the floor of my friend's bathroom and being like, I can't do this anymore. And that was the first time I distinctly remember hearing God's voice. directly said, you don't have to. And I remember I called the guitar player of Snot. His name's Sonny, and at the time, Sonny is he's turning 21 years sober this year, but he was 8 years sober at the time. And I was homeless, and I had run out of options. And him and his ex-wife let me live on their couch, and I started going to 12-step meetings. And so, in 2009, I started my journey. I left the music industry. My first sponsor, Nick, who I actually just spoke to because I turned 13 years sober on this past Thursday of last week. And so my old sponsors usually call me on my birthday every year, and we get to catch up. But he told me, he was like, you don't even know who you are. You have to put God first because you made your career God and you put your faith into this. And how's that working out for you? And so through the process of the 12 steps, I learned how to take personal accountability for the things that had gone wrong in my life. I learned to stop holding on to things and being a victim. And I learned that the things that are beyond the scope of my control, I need a power greater than myself, to get me through just a day at a time sometimes. And those are probably the most valuable lessons I could have ever learned. And so I went to meetings every single day, sometimes 2 or 3 a day if I was having a bad day. And it changed my life. I got to rebuild my relationship with my mother. And I wound up getting a year sober, and I moved to New York City. And my plan was I'll go back to New York. I wanted to, be a sober man in my family because my mother and my sister hadn't had a sober man in the family in, probably a decade at that point at least. And I just, that's what I felt, something inside. I was compelled to go there. And about probably 2 or 3 months into living back in Brooklyn, I was actually on a date, and I'd gone to meetings there. I met a bunch of people, so I found a home group, and I started, I got another sponsor, and I was living in New York, and I got a job, and things seemed to be going the right way, and then my buddy and I started writing songs together, and so, that was kind of the plan. And basically, I came home to a home invasion. My twin brother was on a really bad drug bender, and he had broken into my apartment, and he wanted me to help him kill somebody. And I hadn't talked to him in a long time, and we didn't have a relationship for many years, just because of his using. And we had gotten into a fist fight, while I was living in California, and I was like, we were both still drinking, and I was like, I don't ever want to talk to you ever again. Fuck you, and then, so he was seriously in bad shape. And, he had stitches across his face. Looked like someone had stabbed him. And, I told him he had to leave, and we went outside, and he wound up going to my neighbor's garage and grabbing a crowbar, and he hid in the bushes. And when I came back outside, my sister lived in about 3 blocks away in another apartment. And I decided I would go over there to check on her. And when I got to the end of the drive, my brother hit me from behind and broke my skull with a crowbar. And, we fought. I wasn't rendered unconscious. And so we fought in the street. I tried to get the crowbar from him. I couldn't. He broke my arm in the process of trying to break the front of my skull. I was laying on my back. And I was beaten to death, basically. I was beaten till my spleen burst. And I somehow, got away and ran to my neighbors, and I collapsed. And then the neighbors called 911, and I got rushed to the hospital. And, long story short is, I woke up in the ER, and, my mom was there, and my sister and her best friend and the girl I was dating. And I was bleeding to death, and I was having seizures, and they didn't know what was wrong with me. And I had been internally bleeding because my spleen had ruptured. And so I actually died, and I slipped away. it was very strange, and I had never read any books or seen anything about near-death experiences, so I had no preparation for anything like this happening. And I knew something. I knew I was like, when I was being rushed to the hospital, I knew I was dying, and I had called the guy that I got sober on his couch to tell him I loved him, and I was gonna die. And then I had a white light experience, and I went through a tunnel, and I went into a place, and I basically, I experienced the presence of God, as I understand God, right? Like the, it's like imagine feeling love, but like the most, you know, impactful love you've ever felt in your entire life. But it's like infinite. It's infinite. It's like times of, you can't even quantify it. Like it's immeasurable. And then I was in this white place, and there were other people there that I'd known, and it felt like it was like people I'd known for thousands of years. So like I think sometimes we die and we get sent back here. Like certain of us choose to come back to do something, and then when we're born, we forget. Like that's what I think happens. And so I distinctly remember. I remember when I got to the other side, I forgot I was ever even alive, because I guess my life here is so short. It's like taking a nap. Like your soul is just taking a nap, basically. It's almost like being dead is to wake up, and to being alive here is the dream. And yeah, and I just was greeted by all these beings, and everybody is made of like white light, and you don't speak or talk, because you don't have like the five senses. Everything is like telepathic. And they said to me that I don't have to stay. And then I almost immediately remembered, oh, I didn't do my task. Like I didn't do what I was supposed to do. And then I literally fell. And so I remember falling really fast but controlled, and then I was in the hospital room, in the bed, and like I could see my feet and my body before me, but I was like standing over my head, almost like as if I was looking over the edge of a ledge at myself. And then yeah, and then I went back into my body, and I like sat up, and it felt like I had been, in my living body. It felt like someone held me underwater and then finally let me up to breathe. And I was like, it was like a very, last second, like life force moment. And my, yeah, my nurse was my high school girlfriend's best friend, Jesse, just on the random. And I was like, what? So, and she said, welcome back. And then I was back. And so, that was if I ever had any doubts, and this is the thing, like things got worse before they got better, right? Like I testified against my brother, which, in where I come from, you don't cooperate with police. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to handle it in the street. I think he expected that we would gun each other down or something, like a movie. He's not mentally well. And I wound up pressing charges on him because the DA had showed me all the police reports that he had been beating my mother up. And so he was engaging in elderly abuse. My mother's 73 years old, and my brother's 6'2" and 290 pounds. And so, and like my mom, like an Al-Anon person, would never press charges on him. And so I did, and he took a contract out. He hired a person to murder me, so I had to go into witness protection for 11 months. And yeah, it was gnarly. I think the witness protection stuff probably screwed me up more than anything, because of the anxiety of constantly over your shoulder and hiding. And it really will screw your head. And what I did was I stayed going to meetings, and I stayed with friends. And when I got discharged from the hospital, my friend Mia, her dad is the singer of Aerosmith, and they found out what happened to me. And, Stephen let me live at his house, with security in Massachusetts, so that, I would feel safe while I recovered. And, as bad as a lot of the bad things happened, there were so many people who were, good people and didn't need to do anything for me. And just, uh, just like it was a miracle that I just survived. And, the FBI wound up catching my brother. The guy who was supposed to kill me was murdered in some other situation. And then I testified against him. And, it took almost 2 years out of my life, right? And I had gone into that situation and I had gotten sober and I had all these expectations, right? That, oh, now my life is going to start. And then my brother almost took that away from me. And it was almost this thing that it just would never end, and I feel like that's a lot of the issues with a lot of people is like, people don't know how to let go, and they just won't let you go. And so when I actually testified against my brother and he went to jail, I expected I would be relieved. But instead I just got all my feelings hit me at once. And so I went into a real, like, very dark depression. And I felt like I did something wrong. It was very confusing because I love my brother and he's my only blood relative. And so I felt like I deeply betrayed him and I violated, like, because I grew up on the code of the street as a kid, and it's easy to get involved in that kind of street mentality when you're and your father is absent, you know what I mean? And your role models become garbage, and it was like, and so there were two of me who were fighting. There was like the old me, and then there was the me who was raised in 12-step programs by all these men who had changed their lives and given themselves to God and are living and walking in service of others. And so it was really like I was really tormented. And then, just a series of unfortunate events unfolded where, like, the girl I was dating had relapsed on alcohol, and, we were living together. And so I wound up, moving in and sleeping on my sister's couch at, 29 or 30 years old. It's like super just embarrassing. And then I lost my job because I had caught my boss. I was working in the club scene, and I had caught my boss with one of our servers or bartenders or whatever, and he was married. And it wasn't. It was just happenstance. And so I kind of like, and I got real low, and I was in therapy actively, and I stopped going, to my meetings, and I stopped going to the gym, and I just, I just, like, I wanted to die. And so it was about in 2012. It's actually going to be 10 years soon. I went to the train station in Brooklyn Junction, and I went to my mom's house, and I had a suit. I had one black suit, like, to work at the club, and I put it on the bed so she could bury me in it. And I went to go jump in front of a train. And it's funny, like, I decided I would go. I was afraid of being paralyzed, so I went to an above ground platform, because if the train didn't kill me, then I would fall, and then I would definitely die from the fall, at least. And so, yeah, and so I waited for the train to come, and went to a part of the platform where there were no people, and my phone started to ring. I could see the train coming, and I don't know why I answered the phone. I didn't know the number, and this kid was on the other line, and he's like, "Is this Tommy?" And it sounded like he was crying, and I was like, "Yeah, but I'm in the middle of something right now. Like, what's up?" And he said, "I need help." And I said, "Where are you?" And the train pulled into the station, and I got on the train, and I went and I met this guy, and I started taking him to meetings, and he had overdosed on heroin, and his friends robbed him and left him for dead. his parents had kicked him out and he had no place to go. And, I basically, I just told him, I was like, hey, I'm your sponsor. I'm going to now I'm taking, it was almost like Captain Phillips, look at me, I am the captain now,
Yeah.
And so I just was like, okay. And, we were just two crazy people, he's like, and I had almost 3 years sober and I'm trying to kill myself. And this guy's got he's counting days after he almost just died. And, we figured it out. We went to meetings every day and he's still one of my best friends. And he's an incredible miracle story. He actually, he wound up, he's kind of like a savant with the stock market. He's become a multi-millionaire. He helps a lot of people, and he's like my little brother. And I didn't tell him till he turned 5 years sober. So when he was turning 5, he came to California to visit me, and I had told this story thousands of times, it feels like, because I've been asked to speak, and then I moved back to California. I became a sober coach. I ran Madden House, which is a sober companion. I ran Madden House, which is a sober living in Santa Monica. And then my boss, Earl Hightower, brought me in. And then I started working with celebrities. And I lived with people like Justin Bieber and met several others that I can't mention because of NDAs. And I wound up telling, the meeting that I got sober in, he flew out on his birthday because he wanted to go there because he had always heard about it and never went. And so he came there and they called on him for his birthday, and he told the story about how I sponsored him, and then they called on me, and I, in front of 30 or 40 guys, I told the story about he saved my life because he asked for help. And so if he didn't call me in a moment of desperation, I was too arrogant, I guess, or I had too much ego to go get help for how I was feeling and what I was dealing with. And I needed somebody who was in a worse situation than me to get out of myself. And that's just that one incident. The cure for our depression and our anxiety it's not pills and drugs and bullshit. It's not over obsessing about ourselves. That only makes it worse. It never goes away. The only thing that fixes it is altruism, right? And that's because when we're selfish, and when I'm selfish and I'm self-centered and self-seeking, and I'm not doing what I'm put here to do, and we have to take care of ourselves because we can't transmit what we haven't got. But most people who are truly miserable, and I see this a lot with, when I see the split politically between the left and the right, I think there are people who are being crazy on, if you're too far end of each spectrum, you could go crazy in each direction. But what I do notice is that the people who help, those seem to be the people who are the people I will listen to and agree with most. It's like there are, in LA we had thousands of people riot and burn down Santa Monica and Melrose, but the next morning me and thousands of other people cleaned up the garbage.
So you hit so many things, and our hearts are very much similar in service, because when you've been through stuff like what you just shared, and I am completely blown away. I knew bits of your story. I didn't know all of that. And it is truly incredible. There's a scripture that says, many are chosen, but many are called, but few are chosen. And I believe that when you're chosen, it's almost like you don't have a choice. Like you're sent down this narrow difficult path, and it seems to be a path of extremes, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And what's amazing is it's like we're inundated with all of this confusion and everything, where we've got all of these lies that are hurled at us, and all of this trauma and all of this. I so relate to a lot of what you shared, but it's like when we understand, it's like eventually we have those experiences where it's almost like a dance with destiny, if you will. And it's like in this, it's like your eyes are open to see the bigger purpose, and that really what we are walking out, it has nothing to do with us. It's like the Lord knew, and there's the scripture that says he knew us before we were formed in our mother's womb. And so it was like we were with him before he called us out. And and there's a scripture I wanted to share with you. I didn't plan on sharing scripture on this podcast, but a mark of my journey is I have been connected with many kings, and I say kings with a lowercase k. And you are clearly one of those, but there's a scripture, and it's actually every time anybody mentions Proverbs 31, everybody thinks about the virtuous woman, but the king is actually skipped over. And I feel like even with the sobriety journey that you've been on, this just hits many points. It says, the words of King Lemuel, the oracle which his mother taught him. What, O my son, and what, O son of my womb, and what, O son of my vows? Do not give your strength to women, or your ways to that which destroys kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to desire strong drink, for they will drink and forget what is decreed, and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. Give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to him whose life is bitter. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his trouble no more. This part right here, open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all the unfortunate. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and defend the rights of the afflicted and needy. And so in these situations, you even look at Joseph is a great biblical example, where he goes from prison to second in command over an entire kingdom. And it's like, as you're in those places, you're learning the lessons. And it's about whenever God gives you a platform. And I know all of these influencers, and a lot of influencers, they're doing whatever they're doing, and it's about them. It's like, come to me. And it's about ego and pride and all of those things, when really they have been put in the position with this platform for a purpose. And it's like, what are they doing with it? And so I think that where you have been positioned, what you have walked through, and the fact that you know that you're not a victim, you have overcame, and you're continuing. It's amazing that when the enemy comes in like a flood, the Lord raises up a standard against him, and you're one of those standards that God is continuing to raise up. And so as far as the society that we live in, where everybody is told that they're a victim, we know that we've been given all the keys that we need to overcome. And so I just think that, go ahead.
Well, I think also because I've worked with a lot of people with trauma, people who have actually been the victims of actual true violence and true abuse never want to feel disempowered. It's the people who, victimhood has become a cultural phenomenon of those who refuse to take responsibility. It's an easy out, and it's a very toxic, I almost feel like it's a toxic feminine trait, where like the sick mother who never makes her son or daughter responsible for their behavior. And what does it do? It raises people in a generation who have no accountability. And if you have no accountability, everything that happens to you that you don't like is an opportunity for you to be a victim. And we're reinforcing that, and it has to stop.
I agree. And it stops by us getting involved in the process. And I see so many people have sat idly by and done nothing. It's like they don't like what they see, but they sit on their couch and they yell at the television. And it's like, okay, that's good. But why don't you actually get out into the community and have conversations with people and find out the real needs and see where perhaps your skill set or something that you have can plug into one of those places. And so as you have come out of all that you have come out of, and as you have ventured off into this whole coming out vocally, politically even, I would love for you to share a little bit on the backlash that you have experienced even in your music career.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as far as within my industry, I've been completely ostracized. You know, like there are many musicians who are like-minded and understand what's going on, but they're afraid of of wrecking their career. So they're not truly free men and women. They're actually still enslaved. And so it's cool that they'll message me and we'll talk and they'll be supportive, but I think the time is coming where I think in the next 2 years, there's not going to be room for us to be silent anymore. And, I'm, I'm someone who I've got number one, like 2018 and 19, I was the number one rock artist on Billboard, period. In 2020, I was number two. In 2022, I'm not allowed to be on the radio, right? I'm not allowed to be on Danny Wimmer music festivals, right? I've been blacklisted. So, I actually I was talking with I was at a baby shower yesterday, and I was talking with people. There were members of like Judas Priest were there and Kid Rock's team and Avenged Sevenfold. It was like it was an industry party, and it's just so interesting how somebody like Kid Rock is just he doesn't care. He's just doing his thing and he's standing up and he's so big that they can't stop him. Whereas I was on the trajectory to being an arena headliner and they basically shut it down before it could get to that point because the leftists don't want us to have a voice. I mean, it's very clear that the censorship is needed because they're lying. There would be no need to censor anyone if we were all full of crap, right? If we were full of shit, the truth would just come out. And it's about everything. You have social media and media being completely controlled, by government and pharmaceutical interests. And, there are just forbidden topics where I grew up in a country and I grew up in a music genre. I grew up in CBGBs playing hardcore music. That was my first thing. And punk rock and hardcore and metal and gangster rap and hip hop in general is anti-establishment music. And the most punk rock thing you can be at this point is conservative, and I don't really consider, there are things I don't fully subscribe to one side or the other, right? And that's my right. I'm a human being. I'm not I'm not a joiner either. But it's very obvious to anyone with a brain cell that obviously something is wrong. A lot of people who are like, oh, my biggest thing with how I could not be convinced that Trump was a dictator is because I studied too much world history. Every country that has a murderous dictator, the media are not allowed to criticize them. So you have Trump, who is constantly berated and destroyed by the media. The Durham report has come out, they lied about, they just falsified information. The three-letter agencies are completely corrupted, and they're literally have been weaponized by one political party. I mean, we're becoming a communist. We are in an occupation. If Joe Biden if 10 million of his followers on Twitter are fake, how many of his votes are fake?
Mm.
At what's that?
I was going to say 2000 Mules. If you haven't seen that documentary by Dinesh D'Souza.
I haven't seen it, but this is the thing. I have access to people. I don't need to see these things. Like
Right.
people stuff, and I'm like, I already know. I'm like, by the time something gets published, I've known for months, 6-7 months, a year. So I already knew all these things, and my contacts. I kind of I used and I got deplatformed because I was providing intel to the mass public of what was going on, and I haven't been wrong. So initially I was ostracized because I was a conspiracy theorist, and nobody has enough, the within the industry, there's not enough integrity for these people they don't have enough personal integrity to be like, we were wrong. And I was like, you took me, a guy who has been sober for 13 years, right? Um, I've been in Forbes magazine. I've done Psychology Today. I've donated over $1 million in charities. I've donated tens of thousands of dollars to police officers wounded on the job. I've been. I was awarded the Person of the Year by Rock to Recovery. I've done all these amazing things. I saved the Five Finger Death Punch franchise when Ivan had to be hospitalized for his. I had to sing for that band. That's kind of how I got famous. I came on to be a sober coach, and the guy was in such bad shape he couldn't finish the tour, and the band would have lost millions of dollars if I didn't fill in for them. And so all these people who I've helped have turned their back or talk shit on me because of my political beliefs. And I went from basically being in 2020 in January of 2020, I was like the best, I'm like the new thing, like this is the person to watch. And by January of 2021, I was like I was like a woman beater and a murderer and abuser and like all this crazy shit. And you see how it goes. Like it's what they do is, you can watch what happened with Elon Musk. He called it last week. He said, I'm not going to vote for the Democrats ever again, and watch in the next 48 hours what happens. And then all of a sudden there's like a sex scandal, and there's this and there's that. And, Eric Greitens is running for Senate in Missouri, and he says he wants Mitch McConnell out of. We all do. And so what happens? Mitch McConnell and George Soros hire his ex-wife to file false domestic violence claims against him. They all got caught, and the whole thing fell apart. And this is what's constantly happening. The Me Too movement might seem like it was an accountability movement, but it wasn't. It was to set up a cultural silencing that you could go after any man for anything. And I had that happen to me. And I literally went to court. I went to in criminal court. The case was thrown out because there was no evidence. And I had an ex-girlfriend who was trying to get paid. And I was exonerated in family court of any domestic violence or abuse. But the media didn't run that. They never run the truth.
I hate that, just for the record, this whole feminist movement to completely emasculate and neuter men so that men can't be men and do what they're called to do. And if you do operate in your masculinity, it's labeled toxic, which I hate that whole narrative. And as far as what you were just talking about with all of the things, they can't be called conspiracy theories if they're actually true. And so now we've got the latest monkeypox that they're going to try to shut down the whole global economy. And it's like, what's amazing about all of these things that we're talking about is, even last night we went out to dinner. I went with some friends and we were talking to the lady. She came, and that's actually a good opener. Like, what do you think about the monkeypox? And she's like, what are you talking about? And
I call it donkey pox because it's created by the Democratic Party and the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization, all owned and run by guys like Bill Gates and Charles Schwab and George Soros. I mean, why do you think there's so much? There's been such an attack on men? You think Joe Biden's in charge, right? Like everything is trans. They're trying to make everything trans, which is like, okay, this is like 7% of the 0.7% of the global population. Why is this getting so much attention? Why are we trying to teach it to children? That's insane. And that's for two reasons. It's because, Michelle Obama's a man. probably, you know what I mean? And, you know, and Hillary Clinton is a lesbian and she hates men, you know, and like people don't, you know, this is the thing. It's like that there are people in power who have personal agendas mixed in to what they want to see society. And if you start looking at all the craziness, you're like, who wants this? And then you start tracing back who's in power and why this personally matters to them. It's they're personally invested. They want to reshape reality. And it's just like, why? Like, why? I don't understand. I have friends. I have all different kinds of friends. Basically, my premise is be a good person. Don't hurt anybody. Don't. And if it comes to sexual preference, don't touch children and don't touch animals. And like, and you know, don't mess with me. And do you? And it's not. And again, like, it's not necessarily conservative. A lot of conservative people don't feel differently about that. But I'm kind of, you know, when it says don't tread on me, that's what I mean that in the most literal sense, you know? And so these people who are in control right now are just like, they're senile and elderly and mentally ill, and their worldviews are different than their grandfathers and their fathers that came before them, because these are not self-made billionaires. These people, you know, they grew up with a silver spoon. They grew up with golden parachutes so vast they never touched the ground. They're separated from their humanity because they don't interact with humans.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so they're the way that they think is a form of mental illness, because it's almost like they're traumatized by their privilege that they can feel no humanity. And they're also raised in a way to look at human being as cattle. And so if you have, you know, I don't think about a cow's feelings when I order a steak, you know, and I don't think about a deer's feelings if I go hunting. I'm not considering that. I consider survival. And those people, the way that they survive is they feed off of us. So they study us. They study how we work in groups. They study, you know, they have the access and the finances to the best educations in the world, and they have access to the most brilliant minds. And what happens is even the most brilliant minds get corrupted in the process because they want to dominate us, because they can't. This is the thing. If the world governments collapse tomorrow, people would find a way. People would survive. But if people disappeared, the government couldn't survive.
Right.
Well, and there was just all the politicians left. Dude, they couldn't get their grocery shopping done. They can't touch.
Oh, sorry to cut you off. I was just going to say, to piggyback on what you're saying, I do believe that these are truly revolutionary times. I believe that certain frameworks are being rewritten. And I think that we are going to see things. I mean, we already have seen things that we didn't believe that we could possibly be seeing, at least not this hard and fast. But I believe that in this, and in the, like with people waking up, kind of like going back to 9/11, you know, people were awake for like 5 minutes and then they were lulled very quickly back to sleep. And personally, I believe that we are going to see intervention from the Lord, because there's a time and a season for everything under the sun. And I believe that the enemy is trying to prematurely usher things in outside of his timetable. And so in this, I believe that there are people that are rising up, that are pushing back and even being positioned. One of my consistent prayers is that these wicked kings, these wicked rulers will be removed from their high places and replaced by righteous people. And so in that, I believe that we all have a responsibility, and we're having this great conversation and sharing a whole lot of truth. And Justice Uncensored, the whole point in the name is not to be censored. We should be free to have these conversations and not be censored. The voice and the testimony, it's so important. But I feel that us being active and involved in the process, and if you're like in your county commissioners and your school boards and your city councils and your state reps and all the way up, people need to see your face and they need to hear your thoughts and ideas on things. And I feel that we, the people, need to take our country back. And when we rise up in the actual power and authority that we have been given. I just do not believe that these tyrants are going to be able to do what they want, but it requires action from our part. So with you and where you are as an entertainer, and I know that you've been very vocal on certain issues, if you were to tell our audience, like share any word of action, what would you tell them?
I mean, there are two modes to this, and I think the question that I ask myself is it a Martin Luther King Jr. movement, or is it Genghis Khan, right? Because is it like, are we in a position where do we approach it and this is a genuinely good question. I've thought about this. I'm like, are we in a position where effectively we can have nonviolence in the form of non-compliance? If we can orchestrate mass non-compliance, we can avoid a revolutionary war. If people don't stop, if people continue to acquiesce as they did with COVID, if they continue to go along with what they're told, we are marching towards extinction. And then similar to the way this country was founded, at least 3% of the population will have to stand up, and people will die, unfortunately. We can't in order for the people who are willing and capable of fighting and dying to preserve the nation, the only thing that regular everyday citizens can do to protect that from happening and protect your family members from having to be forced to take up arms against the government is peaceful non-compliance. But the problem is that you have to make the direct correlation. People are not understanding. Every single time you like, oh, I'll just put it on, I just don't want to be bothered, me, that whole thing. Every single time you do that, you're pushing us further. You're actually assisting the globalists push us towards an actual revolutionary conflict, right? So we have to stop. We have to hold the line. And what happens is that they push, and then when we push back, they stop for a little bit, and then they'll push again. So when I say hold the line, I mean hold the line from here on out, because part of their plan is they'll keep going. They'll never stop, right? They won't stop till they're eradicated. So they'll keep pushing and inching, and you don't realize your boundary, which is like the Constitution. We're like a mile down the road from where the Constitution is at this point, because they slowly erode, and then people get pissed and flip out, and then they stop, and then it's okay again, and they push you back, right? Like Elon Musk, was set to buy Twitter, and all of a sudden everyone at Twitter had to undo all the funny business. I think Trump Jr. started getting 800,000 followers, by the week, because he was being shadow banned. I got 5,000 followers. Like, my feed was completely dead. And I still experience this on Facebook and Instagram. And now, after the audits, if Elon Musk doesn't purchase Twitter, all the people who have been speaking freely on the platform for the last 3 weeks, they might just lose their accounts retroactively, right? And that's the push. Oh, we got to stop. And nope. And then they jump here. So we're not really making progress as people think. And sometimes part of the enemy's game is to let us think we're winning, right? Like, never give your opponent an opportunity to never correct your opponent, right? When they're making a mistake. And so, I think morally and psychologically, we have to hold the line. I think that I think that the midterm elections, I think we need to have deputized citizens that are armed, that guard the ballot boxes. And if there are any mules, we need to issue citizens arrest on site. But it's also, we have a problem with the DAs. We have too many George Soros appointed DAs that won't prosecute political criminals. So it literally is going to boil down to us. So if our justice system is compromised and is not working on behalf of the people, then at what point do we take justice into our own hands? At what point do we make it known that if you're going to illegally mess with ballots, you will be apprehended?
This is controversial, warning, controversy statement, but I'm just going to say it. I fully support our Constitution, and well-organized militias are written in the Constitution for a reason. We have the Second Amendment because of tyrannical governments. That's why it was written in, and we see it today. And if we did not have that, we would look like Australia. What's going on over there? I mean, it's really bad. But you and I are very aligned in our thought process on how we should take these things back. And I don't know if you've seen school boards, but there have been school boards where the people have said, you're not representing us, and so you're not doing this anymore. And they have actually taken the school board and started running their own councils and stuff. And I think we need to see more of that.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, I'm not a parent, I'm an uncle. My niece and nephew don't have that problem. They go to a private school, thankfully. But like, I am the kind of person who, like, I don't, I come from a background of illegal activity, of self-governing, just like right and wrong. I grew up in a neighborhood where if there was a pedophile, they would be dead, period. They would just end up dead. And that's it. And most of New York and Boston and Philadelphia, like, the fathers in the neighborhood, the cops would not get involved. And I think we need a return to self-governing street justice when it comes to these things. And if there are people abusing children in school, whether it's psychologically or physically and sexually, they should be accounted. They should just be handled in a certain way. These might be revolutionary things, and people are like, oh, that's so radical. I'm like, I'm just a person from 20 years ago. If I said this in 1999, people would be like, hell yeah,
Exactly.
no one would dispute that, and I'm like, we have to protect the most precious thing. Like, we're in a warfare of mental abuse and control, and we've seen how the last 20-year generation have been molded into they're not emotionally mature. They don't understand the validity of personal responsibility, and they don't understand consequence for words and actions, right? If somebody could spit, some 24-year-old kid could like spit on you because they don't like something you say politically, and then if you break their neck and they're in a wheelchair the rest of their life, they're going to be like, I don't know what happened. Whereas in 1998, if you spit on a guy and he beat you and broke your neck, everyone would be like, bro, that guy spit on the wrong guy.
It's,
and
right.
Like, yeah, and it's like, I don't, not that I think violence is like is a great solution, but it's a system of checks and balances of like, don't, stay in your lane. We all have to stay in our lane. I don't go to other people's jobs and kick the dicks out of their mouth, so to speak. Like, you do your thing, I'm doing my thing, and it's we don't have that in this country anymore. Everyone's in everyone else's business. I grew up in a time where everybody looked the other way. Now a fight happens or an altercation, everyone goes to film it. Everyone's a fed. We call them glowies.
Unless you're Dave Chappelle and you're attacked on stage and nothing happens. Like, these things are just so insane.
That's because there's a gay mafia in Hollywood, right? There's a gay mafia, there's a Jewish mafia in Hollywood, And then there's also a much more darker subsect of people that are running pulling strings there that also additionally are in the pockets of the 3-letter agencies that have been working together since the 70s. And like, to say this like nonchalantly, all of it's a conspiracy theory till you know what's going on.
Yeah, no, I'm very well aware. I've done a lot of digging, and my backstory actually is connected. My stepdad was actually a pedophile and a Freemason. And so that is like the beginning of me. And so when people are like, how did you get red pilled? My answer is really, I mean, I've been awake my whole life because of my own personal experiences and the digging and the understanding the underbelly of all of these wicked demonic things that are happening and these people who have been pulling the strings. But I believe, again, this is all getting exposed and people are being positioned. And I believe that we're going to be given, I actually have seen, the Lord shows me things sometimes, and he took me into scripture, and I've seen divine intervention. Like he's going to do something. And I believe when he does what he's about to do, it's going to usher in the fear of the Lord back into the people. And when the steering wheel, so to speak, is placed back in our hands again, it's up to us on what we do with what we have been given, and we cannot be lulled back to sleep again. So I do appreciate your time and your story. And I also would like to know, in closing, what is next for Tommy Vext?
So what's going on with me is so I'm dropping my new album called Grand Theft Audio, which is, we didn't really get into this the aftermath of being canceled. There was a lawsuit and a settlement, and so I fought to get my music back, and I got it back, and so it's called Grand Theft Audio because it was almost stolen from me. And there's just a lot of great songs on there that are talking about a lot of different topics. It's there's some patriotic anthems. There's a strong anti-suicide advocacy song called Strong for Someone Else, which is literally about it's about the train platform. That song will come out as a single on June 3rd, and the album will be available July 1st everywhere. So you can get it streaming, and I'm on YouTube, and so I'm going as the lone wolf because I came from Bad Wolves, and so I put a new band together, and I'm Tommy Vext is the lone wolf, and so I'll be following up with a U.S. tour in August through September, and then we're looking to go to Europe and the U.K. in October, November, sometime in the fall. And I'm just looking forward to going out there doing my thing. I'm potentially will be doing some Trump rallies in the future. We've been talking about that. Trying to do some stuff with Kid Rock too. I'm a big fan, and I want to be aligned with the people who are fighting for the nation, and fighting. It's a global issue, and so that's what I'm doing. And if you check me out, I'm on YouTube as the Lone Wolf, and just look up Tommy Vext. I'm on Spotify. I have an Instagram that you won't be able to find because I have 400,000 fake Tommy Vext Instagrams. But my Instagram is free Tommy Vext. My Facebook is Tommy is Vext. I'm on TikTok as Tommy is Vext. And so I'm just putting out, music on every Friday until the record comes out. So.
Well, I'm excited to see what comes of this. And you were talking about the tour across the United States. I keep seeing this, and I feel I've actually got a friend here right now, and some other friends. We're an interesting, eccentric crew, but I just see, how it's interesting. President Trump kind of has given the model of he's having these rallies in these places across small town USA that really is the heartbeat of America. And it's these places where it's like, where is he? What is that place? But it's like these places that has all of the space, all of this farmland. And I just believe like there's going to be a lot of patriot movements that's going going to wind up in the middle of nowhere where people are going to come and share their art and share their truth and not be censored. And I just think it's going to be a really good time. And I feel like that is, as far as this movement that's happening in America, that is the direction that it is heading. And
Mhm.
I think it'll be fun to have all of these, we call ourselves the band of misfit toys, come together and
Yeah,
just see what happens from those places. So hopefully we'll meet up somewhere in the world and do something cool in the future.
I'm looking forward to it. I know, well, Carrie Lake and Trump will be in Nashville tomorrow. So I actually like delayed my flight to LA. So I'm gonna go see them tomorrow. And then I'll be in LA and I'll probably be back in Florida soon. So I'm thinking about moving there full time.
Cool. I saw you there. Like, I already thought you lived there. And so anyways, I think that, yeah, there's definitely a place for you in Florida. Plus it's the land of DeSantis. So that helps too.
It's true. This is true.
So what is your website?
TommyVextOfficial.com, and you could pre-order my album there. I've got tons of merch. You know, we do some pretty cool. You know, I've been a big supporter of law enforcement for many years. I have family in law enforcement. I even used to go in LA when I lived in LA before the band even blew up. I worked with the Vice Squad, going to high schools, doing anti-drug and alcohol policy talks. And so, you know, I don't really, I'm very passionate about law and order and what's happened to them. And obviously I've been on both sides of the law, you know what I mean? And so I can tell you from experience, the only people who hate police are the ones who break the law, you know? And
Right.
so, you know, we have merch up there that supports them. And so, you know, and again, I'm mostly focusing on putting stuff out on YouTube and TikTok now because there's no censorship there. And well, there is, but they don't mess with me. They said I'm okay. So
That's good. I'm on Truth Social, and also I don't know if you know about Cloud Hub, but Cloud Hub is a pretty cool place, and it's, you can stream on there, and it's growing. I know the CEO; he's a patriot, and
uh,
so there are other free speech platforms. I like being in places where it's not an echo chamber, and I'm hoping that some of these other people will merge with different viewpoints so that we can
mhm.
have town hall discussions. But there, the good news is there are alternative platforms. I already know as soon as this goes live, like I'm going to be on YouTube for probably 5 whole minutes. So we're going to, build Rumble and all of these other places where they don't censor people who talk about truth and vaccines and Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum and all of these things. So,
Forbidden topics.
right, right.
Did you at least detain Jack Posobiec at the World Economic
I
Forum?
saw that.
Yeah, I gotta hit him up. I think it's. I mean, he's fine, but it's funny how like, you know, they're like, there's somebody here who's gonna tell the truth. Like, it's
Right.
like, what are they so scared of constantly? It's just constantly like, it's ridiculousness.
Crazy for sure. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much for this interview. This has been great. And I'm very excited to see what the future holds for Tommy Vext. And this is Justice Uncensored.